This feels good. Come in, ladies.
I'm not cold.
All right, Mr. Hale, before we start moving things about, why don't you tell Mr. Henderson what it is you saw when you came here yesterday morning?
By the way, has anything been moved? Are things just the way they were left yesterday?
It's all about the same. I mean, when it dropped below zero last night, I figured I'd better have Frank come out here and light a fire for us. Since I was getting pneumonia with a big case on. But I told him explicitly, don't touch anything except the stove. And you know Frank.
Somebody should have been left here yesterday.
Yesterday? You mean like when I had to send Frank down to Morris City because of that guy that went crazy? Well, let me tell you, I had my hands full yesterday. I knew that you could get back here from Omaha in time as long as I was here taking care of everything myself, the way I always do.
Mr. Hale, tell us what happened when you came by the house yesterday morning.
Harry and I had just started to town with a load of potatoes. We came along the road from my place, and when I got here, I said, I'm going to see if I can get John Wright to go in with me on a party telephone. I spoke to Wright about it once before, but he put me off, saying folks talk too much anyway, and all he asked was peace and quiet. I guess you know about how much he talked himself. But I thought maybe if I went to the house and talked about it before his wife, although I said to Harry I didn't know what his wife wanted made much difference to John.
Tell us really later on a little bit more about this. I would like to talk to you about it. But right now I want to know what happened when you got to the house.
I didn't hear or see anything. I knocked at the door, and still it was all quiet inside. I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock. So I knocked again, and I thought I heard somebody say, come in. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet. But I opened the door, came in, and there in that rocker sat Mrs. Wright.
And what was she doing?
She was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hand and was kind of pleating in it.
How did she look?
Well, she looked queer.
What do you mean, queer?
Well, as if she didn't know what she was going to do next and kind of done up.
How did she feel about your coming?
Why, I don't think she minded one way or other. She didn't pay much attention. I said, how do, Mrs. Wright? It's cold, ain't it? And she said, is it? And went on pleating at her apron. Well, I was surprised. She didn't ask me to come up to the stove or to sit down, but she just sat there, not even looking at me. So I said, I want to see John. And then she laughed. I guess you would call it a laugh. I thought about Harry and the team outside, so I said, kind of sharp, can't I see John? No, she says, kind of dull-like. Why, ain't he home, says I. Yes, says she, he's home. Then why can't I see him, I asked her out of patience. Because he's dead, says she. Dead, says I. She just nodded her head, without getting a bit excited, but rocking back and forth. Why, where is he? I asked, not knowing what to say. She just pointed upstairs, like that. I started for the stairs with the idea of going up there. I walked from there to here, and then I says, why, what did he die of? He died of a rope around his neck, says she. And she just went on pleating at her apron. Well, I went out and called Harry. I thought I might need help. When he came in, we went upstairs, and there he was, lying out still.
Mr. Hale, I'd rather you go into that upstairs where you can point it all out. Right now, however, I want you to go on with the rest of your story.
Well, my first thought was to get that rope off. It looked... But Harry, he went up to him and he said, yes, he's dead all right, and we better not touch anything. So we went back downstairs. She was still sitting there the same way. Has anybody been notified, I asked. No, she says, unconcerned. Who did this, Mrs. Wright, said Harry. He said it businesslike, and she stopped, pleating up her apron. I don't know, says she. You don't know, says Harry. No, says she. Weren't you sleeping in the bed with him, says Harry. Yes, says she, but I was on the inside. Somebody slipped a rope around his neck and strangled him and you didn't wake up, says Harry. I didn't wake up, she said, after him. Well, we must have looked as if we didn't know how that could be, for after a minute she said, I sleep sound. Harry was going to ask her more questions, but I said maybe we ought to let her tell her story first to the coroner or the sheriff. So Harry went fast as he could to Rivers' place where there's a telephone.
And what did Mrs. Wright do when she knew that you'd gone for the coroner?
She moved from the rocker to that chair over there and just sat there with her hands held together and looking down. I got a feeling how to make some conversation. So I said I'd come in to see if John wanted to put in a telephone. And at that, she started to laugh. And then she stopped and looked at me, scared. I don't know, maybe it wasn't scared. I wouldn't like to say it was. Soon Harry got back, and then Dr. Lloyd came, and you, Mr. Peters. So I guess that's all I know that you've done.
Well, let's go upstairs first, and then out to the barn and have a look around. I want to get things cleared up. Mr. Peters, you're convinced that there's nothing important here? Nothing that would point to any motive?
This is just kitchen stuff.
What a mess!
Oh, I wonder about her fruit. I wonder if it, oh, it did freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. She said the fire would go out and her jars would all break.
Well, you can't beat the woman. Being held for murder and worrying about her preserves.
I guess when we're through here, she'll have something more important to worry about than her preserves.
Well, women are used to worrying over trifles.
And yet, without all the worrying, what would we do without the ladies? Oh, dirty towels. Not much of a housekeeper, was she, ladies?
Those towels get dirty awful quick.
To be sure. And yet I know that in Dixon County, there are farmhouses that don't have roller towels.
Men's hands aren't as clean as there might be.
Loyal to your sex, I see. But you and Mrs. Wright, you were neighbors. I suppose you were friends.
I haven't seen her much of late years. I haven't been here. It's almost a year.
And why's that? Did you not like her?
Oh, I liked her all well enough. Farmers' wives have their hands full, Mr. Henderson, and
Yes?
well, it never seemed a very cheerful place.
No, I have to agree with you. It's not a cheerful place. I shouldn't say she had much of a homemaking instinct.
Well, I don't know whether Wright had either.
Oh, you mean that they weren't getting on very well?
No, I don't mean anything, but I don't think a place be any more cheerful for John Wright being in it.
Well, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about that, Mrs. Hale. But right now, I want to get a lay of things upstairs.
I suppose that anything Mrs. Peters does will be okay. We're supposed to bring in some clothes and some other little things for her. We
Yes.
didn't leave here in such a hurry yesterday.
Yes, she can pick out, they can pick out what things would be all right for the lady. But Mrs. Peters, I'd like you to keep an eye out for anything that might be of use to us.
Yes, Mr. Henderson. I hate to have men coming into my kitchen, snooping around and criticizing. Of course, it's no more than their duty. Oh, duty's all right. But I guess that deputy sheriff that came out to make the fire got a little of this on. I wish I'd thought of that sooner. Seems mean to talk about it for not having things slicked up when she had to come away in such a hurry. Oh. She had bread set. Oh. It's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. I think there's some up here that's all right, Mrs. Peters. Yes, here. And it's cherries, too. Oh, I declare, I believe it's the only one. Oh, she'll feel awful bad after all her hard work in the hot weather. I remember the afternoon I put my cherries up last summer.
really ought to get those things out of the front room closet. You coming with me, Mrs. Hale? You could help me carry them. It's cold in there.
Right was close. I think that's maybe why she kept to herself so much. She didn't even belong to the Ladies' Aid. I suppose she felt she couldn't do a part, and, well, you don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. I heard she used to wear pretty clothes and be lively as Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. But that was over 30 years ago. This was all you was to take in?
Oh, well, she also asked for an apron. Funny thing to want. Certainly not much in jail to get you dirty, goodness knows. But I guess maybe to make her feel more natural. She said they were in one of the drawers of this cabinet here. Oh, yes, here. That'll do. Oh, and then a little shawl that always hung on the back of her door. Yes, here it is.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
do you think she did it?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't think she did. Asking for an apron and her little shawl, worried about her fruit.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in his speech, and he'll just make fun of her, saying she didn't wake up.
Well, John Wright didn't wake when they were slipping that rope under his neck.
No, it's strange. It must have been done awful crafty and still. The men folks said it was a funny way to kill a man, rigging it all up like that.
That's just what Mr. Hale said. There was a gun in the house. He says that's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said coming out that what was needed in this case was a motive, something to show anger or sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here. It's wiped to here. I wonder how they're finding it upstairs. I hope she had it a little more read up there. You know, it seems kind of sneaky, locking her up in town and coming out here trying to turn her own house against her.
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
I suppose it is. You better loosen up your things, Mrs. Peters. You won't feel them when you go out.
She was piecing a quilt.
Oh, what a pretty pattern. I wonder when she was gonna quilt it or just not.
They want to know if she was going to quilt it or just knot it.
Well, Frank's fire sure didn't do much for up there, did it?
Sir.
Let's go out and take a look around the barn and get things cleared up out there.
I don't see it as anything so strange as our taking up our time with little things while we're waiting for them to get the evidence. I don't see it as anything to laugh about.
Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale.
here, look at this one. This is the one she was working on, and look at the sewing. All the rest is so nice and even. And look at this one. It's all over the place. what she was about.
What are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
Oh, just pulling out a stitch or two that's not sewed very good. Bad sewing always makes me fidgety.
Well, I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale.
what do you suppose she was so nervous about?
I don't know. She was nervous. You know, I sew real queer sometimes when I'm just tired. Well, I ought to get these things bundled up. They may be done sooner than we think, you know. I wonder where I could find some paper and some string.
In that end table, maybe.
Mrs. Hale, it's a bird cage. Did she have a bird?
I don't know if she did or not. I haven't been here in so long. There was a man around last year selling canaries cheap, but I don't know if she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Seems funny thinking of a bird in here. But she must have had one, or why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to her.
I suppose the cat got it.
Oh, no, she didn't have a cat. She got that feeling some people get about cats. She was afraid of it. My cat got into her room down at the jailhouse, and she got awful upset, and she made me take him right out.
My sister Bessie was like that. Queer, ain't it?
Look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is torn right apart.
Looks as if someone's been rough with it.
Why, yes.
I wish if they were gonna find evidence, they'd be about it. I don't like this place.
Well, I'm awfully glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It would be awfully lonesome sitting here all by myself.
It would, wouldn't it? But I tell you what I do wish, Mrs. Peters. I wish I'd come over once in a while. I wish I had.
Oh, but Mrs. Hale, of course, with your house and your children, you were awful busy.
I could have come. I stayed away because it weren't cheerful, and that's why I ought to have come. I never liked this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow and you can't see the road, I don't know. But it's a lonesome place and always was. Oh, I wish I'd come to see Minnie Foster sometimes. I can see now.
Now, Mrs. Hale, you mustn't reproach yourself. Well, sometimes it's just hard for us to see what's going on with folks until something turns up.
Not having children makes for less work, but it makes for a quiet house and with right out to work all day and no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a nice man.
Yes.
Good.
Nice. He paid his debts, he kept his word as well as most, and he didn't drink. Oh, but he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters. Just to pass the time of day with him, like a raw wind that gets to the bone. I should think she would have wanted a bird. What do you suppose went with it?
I don't know. He must have just got sick and died.
You weren't raised around here? You didn't know her?
No, not until they brought her around yesterday.
She, come to think of it, is kind of like a bird herself. Real sweet and pretty, kind of timid and fluttery. How she did change. Tell you what, Mrs. Pierce, why don't you bring this quilt in with you? It might take up her mind.
I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. Why, there couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? But I wonder what I would take in. Her patches in here, and maybe some other things she needs.
Here's some rags. I expect there's some sewing things in here. What a pretty box. Looks like something somebody would give you. I wonder if her scissors are in here. Whew. There's something wrapped up in this piece of silk. Oh,
It's not her scissors.
Mrs. Peters, look. Oh, it's the bird. But Mrs. Peters, look at its neck, look at its neck, it's all. Other side too.
Somebody wrung its neck.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to quilt it or not?
We think she was
We
gonna
think
knock.
she was gonna nod it.
Has the bird flown?
We think the cat got him.
Is there a cat?
Not now. They get real superstitious. They just leave.
No sign of anyone having come from the outside with their own rope. Let's just go back upstairs and take another look at everything piece by piece. It's got to have been somebody that knew this house inside and out.
She liked the bird. She was gonna bury the bird in this pretty little box.
When I was a girl, a kitten, there was a boy who took a hatchet right before my eyes, before I could get there. If they hadn't held me back, I would have hurt him.
I wonder how it would seem never to have any children around. No. Wright wouldn't like the bird. A thing that sang, she used to sing and he killed that too.
We don't know who killed the bird.
I knew John Wright.
There's an awful thing happened in this house the other night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept. Slipping a rope around his neck and choking the life right out of him.
His neck. Choked the life right out of him.
We don't know who killed him. We don't know.
If there had been years and years of nothing, and then a bird to sing to you, it would be awful. Still, after the bird was still,
I know what stillness is. When we was homesteading back in Nebraska, my first baby died just after he was 2 years old. And me with none others then.
how soon do you suppose they'd be through looking for evidence?
I know what stillness is. Mrs. Hale, the law has got to punish crime.
I wish you'd seen Minnie Foster when she wore a white dress with blue ribbons and stood up there in the choir and sang. I should have come over sometimes when she was here. That was the crime. You tell her fruit was gone. Tell her it ain't. Tell her it's all right. You take this thing to prove it to her. She may never know if it was broke or not.
My, wouldn't the menfolk think we were silly if they overheard us? Getting all stirred up about a little old dead canary, as if that had anything to do with... Well, wouldn't they just laugh?
Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't.
Well, Peters, it's all perfectly clear, except for the reason for doing it. You know how the juries are with women. It had to be a definite thing to show, a definite thing to write a story about, something that would connect up everything. You have done it in a strange way.
Well, I got the team around. Pretty cold out there.
Peters, I'm going to stay here for a while by myself. You send Frank out for me a little bit later, if you can. I want to look over everything again in detail. I'm just not satisfied that we can't do better.
Would you like to take a look at what Mrs. Peters is bringing in?
There doesn't seem to be very many dangerous things that they've picked out to bring in. Now, Mrs. Peterson doesn't need supervising. As a matter of fact, a sheriff's wife is married to the law. Ever think of that, Mrs. Peters?
Not just that way.
Married to the law.
You know, Mr. Henderson, we ought to go into that front room and check the windows before we go.
Oh, windows?
Yeah. Mr. Hale, we'll be right out.
Well, Henry, we've decided she wasn't going to quilt it. She was going to, what do you ladies call it?
We call it knot it, Mr. Henderson.